today's lecture by Preston Singletary. Dr. Singletary began working in glass in 1982, and from 1984 through 1999, he studied and worked with artists at the Pilchuck Glass School in Stanwood, Washington. After this, his career took off with many solo gallery and museum exhibitions. He won his first award from the Seattle Arts Commission in 2002 and continues to win well-deserved recognition, most recently bringing home the Arts Innovator Award from the Artists Trust in Seattle in 2022. His current exhibition, Raven and the Box of Daylight, has traveled from the Museum of Glass, where it opened in 2018, to the Wichita Art Museum, the National Museum of the American Indian, the Chrysler Museum of Art, and Oklahoma City Museum of Art. And it's still going strong. We don't know where it's going to go next. He is, of course, well known to SHI for his work in this room, the glass panel behind me, and the two cast glass warrior house posts on either side. They were installed in 2015 when we opened. He serves on our Board of Trustees and our Native Artists Committee. He is known as a teacher and collaborator in glass with other Native American, Maori, Hawaiian, and Australian Aboriginal artists. Through his activity, he says, "I've come to see that glass brings another dimension to Indigenous art." We are very excited to hear more about his journey in this lecture entitled Eagle's Journey with Raven. And we will have questions afterwards, both in person here and online. I remind you, please turn off your cell phones. Thank you, Preston.
Thank you very much. So, Preston Aksayi, Tlingit, Kenach, Kochain, Dusak, Kagwantana, Hutsiti, Sialakwan, Ayachat. And that's the extent of my Tlingit language knowledge, and so I'm going to switch over to English. Maybe Lance can teach me a few new sentences. Would be really something to think about. So I am. I grew up in Seattle. My great grandmother is from Sitka, Alaska. The Kagwantan killer whale clan, the Eagle moiety, so that's why I entitled this Eagle's Journey with Raven. And so this is quite a robust presentation. I got really ambitious to share a lot of history and then some new directions with my work. And so I hope that you can all remain awake for this. I won't bore you to tears. So yeah, I grew up, my great-grandmother came from Sitka, Alaska, and she moved to Seattle in the 20s. She was widowed. She was married to James Bartlett, and then she died in a sawmill accident. George Bartlett, I say James. And so she was left with 4 children, and she remarried a man, a Filipino man. So this is a picture of her, one of the earliest photos that we were able to find of her in the Sitka School at the Sheldon Jackson. And this was her husband, who had traveled to Alaska, and he happened to be Filipino. And so he married her and brought her to Seattle in 23. And so from that point forward, we grew up in the Seattle area. And then came me. After my great-grandmother, or my grandmother, also married a Filipino man, because there was a lot of Filipinos hanging around the house, and so technically I'm a Tlingit, right? And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of my family. This is my wife, Åsa Sandlund. She comes from Sweden. We met on a work trip when I was there in 1993. And we have 2 kids, and we have a flying dog. This kind of goes back to I always say this is kind of the origins of my career in some ways, because the eruption of Mount St. Helens, there was a glass studio in Seattle who took the ash from the volcano, the eruption, and they would, the basis of glass is silica, so they would melt glass out of the ash and then make, so I got a job in 1992 working in a factory doing Christmas balls, paperweights, very rote kinds of things. And then by 1994, I started to go to Pilchuck Glass School a couple of years after I started. And that's where I was exposed to artists from all around the world who were teaching and working, learning different techniques of glass making. And I'll talk more about that project that I did there. This was 1997. Here I'm working with Dante Marioni, who was a good friend of mine from high school. His father was an old hippie glass artist, and so he got us kind of involved with the school. As a kid, my only aspiration was to play music, and my goal, if I could have checked the box for a job, wish, was rock star. But so I still play music. I was going to jump right into that music aspect of it, because it is a big part of what it's my creative expression. And this was the first band that I started after a while, having put music on the back burner for many years. I thought, well, why not start a native group and work with native musicians? So we started this group called Little Big Band. Here we're playing with a Gene Taga band, and so we were quite a kind of a theatrical group. We did a lot of sort of performance type things. This was James Luna, who was an amazing artist from the Southwest. But I did make the good connection with Bernie Worrell, who was the keyboard player for Parliament Funkadelic, if you know that group. So I met him when I turned 50, and I paid into this Kickstarter campaign, which we started to, I was talking with his wife, who was the organizer, and I said, well, I'm also a musician, not only a glass artist. And she said, well, you should open up for Bernie's band. And so what we'll do is we'll play your party, and the next night we'll do a public show, and you open up for Bernie, and we can, and you, can hang out with him. So as we parted ways at the end of the show, he said, he'd like to collaborate with me. These are 4 albums that we created with Bernie. We worked with him for about 3 years before he died in 2016. And so he was really just kind of a spiritual leader and an amazing improvisational musician. So we wanted to blend like this funk and jazz style into the music, and then use looking through like a native lens. So I brought a lot of my friends together, including so Stanton Moore is out of New Orleans. Skerrick is an amazing saxophone player out of Seattle, and he knew Bernie very well. I called on my Tlingit friends to sort of join in the group. So Gene's been involved with both Little Big Band and Ku'ik. This is the name that we call ourselves. Captain Rob is from, he's Blackfoot. And so, we walked into the studio with some loosely formed ideas, and we just started playing together and recording, and Gene was doing spoken word, storytelling, and also Clarissa Rizal, who was also a real important figure in my life. But so, since I never became a rock star, but I have these photos, so it kind of looks like I am. I like to show them. I like to show lots of photos of the group, because we are a large group. Right now we're about a 12-piece band we're going to try out a 4-piece horn section in a couple weeks at the Indigenous Peoples Day in Seattle. So in any case, Clarissa passed away, Bernie Worrell passed away, so we suffered some loss in the group. So we recruited new members. Sandra Segundo is a Haida woman. And we rounded out the band and have amazing creative people. And so you can imagine with this guy, you might know who he is. He's local, just an amazing individual. So this is the group, how it looks today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like the foundations of what brought me to do what I do today. And from, I didn't go to art school. I wasn't raised with any religious instruction. I was, so Carlos Castaneda was it was really popular in the 80s, and when I was reading his books, it really sparked some sort of idea in my mind about his ability to travel within his dream time and all of these things, these mystical things that really piqued my curiosity. At the time, these are some of the things that I was making back in the formative years when I was just learning how to blow glass, learning how to make objects and control the material. So these are examples of some of the earliest works that I did, based on various influences of modernist decorative arts from the 30s and 40s, and using both Italian and Swedish or Scandinavian design sensibilities. But from that Carlos Castaneda moment, we're talking about dreams. We're talking about. I started to learn about Carl Jung and his dream analysis process that he had been sort of studying, and he had visited with the Pueblo people down in New Mexico, and was studying the Native American vision quest and things like that. So this was really just kind of a side interest of mine, but getting into the psychology, I've always had a big fascination about that. So this was kind of a component of understanding how our minds work, and then not wanting to get too into how my own mind works. I read a few books about Jung psychology, and I also studied Aikido, which for me was also another exploration into sort of a spiritual practice, which was rooted in Zen Buddhism, but it was also kind of this moving meditation and physical training, a discipline that I applied myself to for several years. But I also thought about it in a lot of ways in, you're working with this opposing force, and, someone's coming at you and you have to blend with their energy, and then you turn it around. And what I really got out of that was working with glass in general is kind of like, you're moving your body with this material that's on the end of this blowpipe. And so for me, it made a lot of sense to me, this training, and it really added to my feeling of, connection to the material. But, always governed by the Tlingit way, I was, really fascinated, but didn't really understand a lot about Tlingit culture. Growing up, of course, my great-grandmother was a big presence in our lives, and she lived to be 100 years old. And, so we talked about, we were exposed to it. And so in 1988, I decided to explore the way of putting design work into the glass. And so this was a process that I did for many years, and I was looking at traditional objects, and I was trying to turn them into glass sculptures. So obviously the hat form becomes, a very natural blown glass form that was kind of my jump off point there. This hat form is a quick story about my aunt, who was really excited that I was exploring the Tlingit designs. came over to this holiday open house in the studio that I worked in. And it was the very beginning phases. And so I had one of these hats. And my aunt said, well, can we look at this hat on this pedestal? You know, because the studio that I worked at was the studio of Benjamin Moore. And so his work was all displayed nicely on these beautiful pedestals with lights and stuff above them. And we usually had a card table over in the corner. But so we said, sure. So I took Ben's piece down and put the hat up on the pedestal. And about 10 people had gathered around to see what was going to happen when I, you know, placed this hat there. And then these shadows came through. And it was like, oh, look at that. And I was like, well, yeah, that's what I intended all along, you know. That was like the aha moment, right? So when I realized that there was this shadow effect that is sort of like, you know, it's become more of a, I don't know, of a symbol or a spiritual symbol. Like, you know, when the lighting is correct, then it is showcased in its, you know, a really beautiful way. So looking at objects over the years, I was trying to, as my skills developed, I would try to make objects that are obviously reflective of the cultural styles. And so working mostly with just hand shaping, hand forming, other than this particular mask shape. That's actually blown into a form, and then it gives me the general shape of a traditional mask, and then I put the design work on it. So yeah, there was so much to learn and explore, and you know, I had to expose myself to other artists, other, you know, native artists, and ask for, you know, input. And so I was able to start to render these forms in different ways, and all the while trying to learn about the culture and understand the mythologies, understand the history, understand the protocols behind it, because of course, you know, there's a lot of issues of intellectual property. There's, you know, they belong to certain clans, and these stories go, you know, back hundreds and thousands of years. So, so these, to me, when I'm working with these shaman materials, it's kind of like a composition, but presented in such a way that it becomes an art piece, you know, in itself. So. Lo and behold, I started to get a lot of attention for what I was doing, because at the time when I started blowing glass, there wasn't very many people really working with glass, and not many native people. Though when I was at Pilchuck in 1984, I did meet two individuals who were native, and one was Larry Avakana from Yupiat territory, and he was there at the school, as well as another Pueblo artist named Tony Hohola. So they really also encouraged me on this path back in the day, and gave me a lot of support. And so here I am exploring all these different forms and trying to bring, you know, realize them using different techniques from blowing and casting. So I do lost wax casting, and this is a full-size canoe paddle. Again, just going over trying to replicate as many objects as I could and make them look traditional. So this is sort of what really kind of got me going, because when I made the departure from making, you know, vases and bowls and decorative arts, then you know, people really, they looked at my work and responded in such a way that resulted in a lot of success. I was able to build on that platform and just, you know, explore different ways of working. So this is a lost wax casting, and when I do the wood, you know, the totem forms, I work collaboratively with carvers. So there's all different carvers that help me realize these forms, and with the knowledge that they're helping me, I'm going to transform them into glass. So this was one of the largest totem poles that I made, and this is represents my great-grandmother Susie, who had a pet bear as a child. So there's the little bear cub up on top, and it was told that my uncle told me a story that, you know, she kept this bear cub as a pet, and that there's a Russian woman in Sitka, and they would sell taffy, And so my great-grandmother would go out and pick berries in the forest, and then she'd bring them back and sell the berries so she could get Russian money to buy taffy for her pet. So, in keeping with tradition, these totem poles, they tell a story. In each one of these objects, or the totem pole forms, I have a specific story too. So I started, thinking about that whole. There was a native scholar whose book I read named Renard Strickland, and he wrote, it was ironic that the modernists forced us to look at the primitive, in parentheses, and appreciate differing levels of reality. So what the modernists navigated or morphed into this art movement called primitivism, which of course a lot of writing has been done about that, how some of these objects were really inspired by African art, Native American art, oceanic art. And so I started to think about kind of turning the tables on the modernists and using their forms to, for inspiration. So I went into a big phase of abstraction and making things that were a lot more fluid and kind of, sometimes ambiguous, but also, adorning it obviously with Northwest Coast art. So these are all sort of made-up compositions, made-up mythologies of my own design. But again, just playing with the organic nature of the glass itself, and also trying to bring another dimension to, our cultural art. So, so I spent many years doing that, playing with different ways of working with the glass, and as my my design ability evolved, with the form line, then I was able to try all these different things. So a lot of these pieces is from a pretty broad variety, many years, or about 10 years of different kinds of things, and then playing with these shapes. Sometimes they're inspired by amulets, sometimes they're inspired by, many different things. So this was kind of my, and then playing again with the surrealism, like these little sort of scenes of nature within the piece, kind of drawing on that inspiration from the surrealists and the modernists and what have you. So, then, of course, there was Joseph Campbell, who did a lot of comparative mythology and really tied a global awareness about all the symbolism, which goes back into the psychology as well, of course, because what does a dragon represent in Eastern culture? It's a symbol of power. In the Western culture, it's something to be killed and destroyed. So so there's a frame of reference in all of this stuff. And then I started to learn about the archetypes of the heroic monomyth, and a lot of our stories, a lot of old mythologies, and even movies are based on this basic premise. If you think about Star Wars, okay, so Luke has lost his whole family and he has to flee, and then he finds these helpers that teach him about things, and then all of a sudden he comes through and he's emerges victoriously and destroys the Death Star or whatever, or the Wizard of Oz. So it's the same archetype here. So this is where I get a lot of this idea about the work and Tlingit culture, and how we can sort of use and borrow from other modes of mythology and theology. And so my own sort of hero story, or if you want to call it that, was back in 2001 when I proposed the idea to make a totem pole for the Pilchuck Glass School And for many reasons, because John Halberg was the heir to Weyerhaeuser, but he was also a passionate Northwest Coast art collector. His entire collection resides at the Seattle Art Museum, and he donated it to the museum for everybody to be able to see and have access to. Of course, he had repatriated this double-headed killer whale dagger to a family in Angoon, and as a result was adopted and given a Tlingit name. So that was John Halberg. Also his wife, Annie Halberg, was a big patron of the school. But it was really David Svensson, who I met in 1988, who was at the Pilchuck Glass School, and I was doing my sort of first rudimentary tracing stuff out of books and trying to put it onto the stencils onto the glass and then carve the designs in. And he asked about my interest in Northwest Coast art, Tlingit art. And then he told me that he'd been living up in Haines, Alaska, working at Alaskan Indian Arts for several summers, and was carving alongside John Hagen and Nathan Jackson and many great, Wayne Price and many other great carvers too. So he really understood this, but of course, being non-native, he had sort of a feeling of this wasn't his, but by working with me, he was able to help me achieve that big totem pole. So he carved that one for me. But he really understood the culture and was a very skilled carver. So he really did encourage me back in 1988. So these are some details from the totem. We created these glass castings that were then inlaid into the pole. And so for me, this was just like, the perfect aligning of the stars, because here I am at Pilchuck Glass School, where I, kind of found myself as an artist, but also had the Tlingit carvers come down, and we worked on this totem pole right next to the glass studio. So we were teaching a class, and we were putting the finishing touches on the totem pole. And so here you go. This was so here, the installation ceremony, and Clarissa Rizal was up there with us. She's a very special person to me. I'll talk more about her later. But so here's that double-headed killer whale dagger that sort of symbolizes John Halberg's connection. So we went to the community and asked, could we have permission to make a copy of it, carve it out of wood? So Steve Brown, who was with the Seattle Art Museums, he carved this, and then we cast it in glass. And then David Svensson is also a neon artist, so we illuminated these glass castings inside the totem pole. So it was kind of a really groundbreaking event for me, and also kind of a rite of passage. And I remember distinctly when I was there, we were working on the totem pole for like 3 weeks at the campus, and Charlie Jimmy and Verna Erickson came down, the elders from Haines, to help us do the installation ceremony. And one day after dinner, they were sitting out there having coffee, and Charlie started playing his drum and singing, and that just hit me like, I had this immense feeling of deja vu, which I haven't had since, and it had been a long time since I'd experienced that, but it really signified to me that I was in the right place doing what I should be doing. So once I placed myself on this path, I just really took it very seriously. A lot of my teachers and elders, impressed upon me, once you become a keeper of cultural knowledge, it becomes a responsibility. So today I take that, very much to heart, because I'm honoring my community, I'm honoring my family and the history. And so that's how I got here. So there's been a lot of people who have, encouraged me along the ways, and this is Benjamin Moore here. In a studio that I worked at for about 20 years. I was working with many different artists through the studio, and he employed me and trusted me to help him for that period of time. And I was able to learn a great deal of working with glass because of all the people that we worked with. And every artist has a different sensibility with the material. And so that's why, so I did learn really just through practical experience. This is Lino Tagliapietro, who I just visited in the spring, and he's an Italian master glass blower, lives in Murano, and he really imparted lots of support and education around handling glass. He's 80 years old today, just retired from glass blowing. And of course, Clarissa was, somebody who, when I was looking to connect with artists, somehow I was drawn to Clarissa's work. I was buying videos and, learning about all these different people. And Clarissa was one, and I think I called her out of the blue one day and said, "Hi, I'm Preston Singletary. I admire your work." And then we just started out this friendship, which just endured for the entire time. I dragged her into my band. She was singing traditional songs and doing spoken word, and so and she taught me a lot about the culture. Sometimes we would speak by phone for like 2 hours, and I'd be sitting there drawing and listening to her speak and tell stories. She told me a lot about the people that are in this area, all the different artists and all the different families, and gave me a lot of information. And, of course, anybody who knows Clarissa knows she was a remarkable woman. And so I'm grateful for that time that I had with her. With Clarissa, we tried to motivate artist gatherings up here in Juneau. We did these during the celebration. For 2 years, we brought people together, and, because there's so many artists that are here, also with the dance groups, and we thought this really should be something that we should establish and get a chance to interact with the other Alaskan artists. A lot of the artists, they live in remote areas and they don't get down to the bigger cities. We don't always get a chance to connect with each other. And so in any case, that was something that we did, and we brought my band up. That was an incredible event. And then Joe David, who is Nuu-chah-nulth, he's from the west coast of Vancouver Island. And a lot of people don't know who Joe David is, but he's equal contemporary to Robert Davidson in the very same way. But he has not pushed himself into the commercial market as much as Robert has, and so a lot of his work centered around his connection to the art and the art for his own people. So he, when we were at Pilchuck, I met him in 2000, and then he came back in 2001 when we did the totem pole, and he was adamant about doing a sweat lodge on the campus. And so this was my first sort of introduction to Native spirituality. He had been a sun dancer with the Lakota people, and so we built this lodge up on the campus, and told everybody, yes, this is going to be a suffering and sacrifice ceremony. Anybody who's interested, come and talk to Joe. And after looking into their eyes and telling you what you need to know, let you know if you should be a part of this ceremony. And I'd never done a sweat before, and I had no idea what to expect. I was like, suffering and sacrifice, what's he going to do to us up on the hill, And I was like, and so I was kind of trepidatious, and I said, Joe, look into my eyes, you got to tell me if, am I ready to do this? And he says, well, let me put it this way. He says, you'd better be. And so for 4 days, we did, not in a row, but over the course of 3 weeks, we did 4 sweat ceremonies. And the last ceremony we did was a morning ceremony. So we go into the lodge at 12 o'clock at night. When we exited the lodge, it was daybreak, and it just happened to be my birthday, and then he gave me a name. So he shared his name with me, which of course on the Northwest Coast is a big thing. And it signifies growth or change within your life, or if you become you know, if you become a speaker or the leader of a house group, you might assume an ancestral name. So I carry the name Kakawinchief, which is Joe's artist name. And so that was quite an eye-opener to me. And I spent 10 years doing sweat ceremonies with Joe up on the Pilchuck campus. Another component of this, you know, this exposure to artists, you know, were these Indigenous artist gatherings, and they were international. Between the Maori, the Hawaiian, the Pacific Islanders, and North America, we would get together and we would do these artist gatherings. And this was, unfortunately, this man passed away. He was one of the instigators of the one on Hawaii. But it was an incredible and profound experience to work with other Indigenous artists and to learn from them and how do they create artwork for the contemporary art market. And so this was something where we would, you know, just work together side by side. Sometimes we would dabble in other mediums. And this was in New Zealand, 2010. And, you know, the Maori people are incredible. They're really incredible people. They're very unified. They're very organized. They're educated. They are very unified in their culture. And, of course, it's very easy because it's one language, it's two islands, but they showed us an amazing way of being together and working for the common good within their culture. And so sometimes I get to, you know, work to blow glass in these areas. And so here I was working with a native or a Maori artist to create this Maori mask. Of course, traveling is a big part of glass blowing. Once we, you know, it's a very communal act. It's a collaborative effort. To make complex forms, you really need to have people that you can work with and help lift the piece back and forth so you can preserve your energy to, you know, create these objects. In 2015, I got to go to Australia and on a cultural art exchange and work and meet Jamboa Marwili, who actually I had met in Seattle. But I said, if I'm going to Australia, I want to go all the way to the Northern Territory, and I want to meet with Jamboa. So he hosted me at his in his village, and it was just, you know, an amazing time. And some of their cultural arts, which these are all tree bark, and then they're painted on. And they call them their pattern laws. So in the same way that we have crest symbols, they have patterns that represent their specific family and background, so, and their history. So this is just one example of the art style from that particular territory. And then, of course, there's Walter Porter, who I befriended in 2004. I met him at the opening of the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. And he had seen my work, and he said, you know, my life's work is all about Raven in the Box of Daylight, and you make this raven with the sun in its beak. It's like, you know, it's amazing. You have a real opportunity to take our artwork beyond, you know, into the bigger world. And with your people are looking at your work, and he saw that, and so he encouraged me, and he worked with me for almost 10 years. We worked, and he shared a lot of information about his work in mythology, tying all the way back to the Joseph Campbell and all of the other things that I cited. So, you know, so this was an exhibition that we wanted to accomplish together. We never were able to do it together because Walter passed away. So I was left trying to salvage the idea of doing an exhibition, and with all of the information that he had given me, and how it unfolds and how the thread of the story goes. And so what I did was work with Miranda Bellardi Lewis to help curate this exhibition. So this was placing you basically in the thread of the story of Raven and the Box of Daylight. And you can see it's enhanced with video projections and what have you, trying to evoke the Alaskan Native area. And so I'm not going to get too deep into this particular story because many of you probably know it. But this is the Fisherman of the Night scene where Raven goes to the Fisherman of the Night and asks, "Where's the daylight?" The old man and the daughter, the old man on the right, and then the daughter, who I learned by working with other local storytellers that the daughter is transparent. So perfect. I have a transparent daughter here, which signifies a supernatural being. Raven's going through the transformation. He transforms into a human child. Ways of illustrating these transformations, and then entering into the clan house. And then of course, the boxes that contain the stars, moon, and sun. And then the final act of the story where the people are startled by the light. Some of them jump into the water. They become the beings in the ocean. Some of them jump into the sky. They become the birds. Some of them run off into the forest, become the forest animals. And then the crest symbols that represent those different areas of the natural world. So that's what we came up with. And as Chuck mentioned, it's still touring. It's actually ended its first run. Now it's being picked up by more museums, and it's going to open up at the Idle-Jorg Museum in November, and a few others. But the collaborations, as I mentioned, are also ways of me, becoming inspired, working with other artists. This is Jody Naranjo, Santa Clara Pueblo potter. Of course, I invited Jambois and Goinbi to come up to Seattle from the Northern Territory, and we worked on some objects. So each time I'll make an object, and then they will do the design work, based on their system of patterning. Of course, Joe David and I work together as much as we can, and his guidance always pushes me into very deep realms of I didn't silence my phone, I'm sorry. Okay, so anyways, how are we on time? Oh geez, see, I'm blathering on. Collaborations, Dante Marioni, as I mentioned, my good friend. And then Harlan Riano, another Santo Domingo Pueblo. So these always challenge my skills in trying to come up with different forms. Tammy Garcia was probably one of the most well-known Santa Clara Pueblo potters. These are some of the objects that we made. Of course, Lewis Gardner from the Maori tribe, or Maori culture. And the green there is jade stone. So those are his creations, and then sometimes we would design on the glass piece. Buffalo Man. So I get to work with a lot of different characters here. He's from the Choctaw tribe. These are some of the mound builder materials. Lisa Telford, this is a foam woman. This is one of the Haida myths. Raven Sky River is an amazing, talented sculptor. Makes these beautiful naturalistic killer whales, or whales in general, a lot of different things that he makes. These were his pieces that he made, and then of course I put my design work on them. So going to be accused of oversharing here, but I've got a lot of stuff to show here. These are public art pieces from various parts of, between Alaska and Portland. These are different projects that I've worked on for public art installations. Some of the more recent ones, the Climate Pledge. This is the most recent one that opened up, is the Linwood Sound Transit Station. This was, just getting, it just opened up about 2 weeks ago. Did a year of test runs, and now you can actually go into this train station. So, again, working with abstractions. Of course, working with Sleeping Beauty as the most recent project I'm designing for the ballet, Pacific Northwest Ballet. And so this was some of the sets. This is actually the set. There were some rehearsals that were going on last week in gearing up for a fundraiser. So these are some of the ways that some of my designs have been used. And of course, I'm not they didn't want to place it in the context of an Alaskan Native village per se. So we did different details that are also within the props and what have you. So I've eaten up a lot of time. It's 45 minutes. I don't know how much time we have. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not going to, I had an idea of reading this entire story, but this is a new direction for me. I've been working with Garth Stein, who is also part Tlingit. He's a novelist. He wrote a book called The Art of Racing in the Rain, which you might have read or seen the movie. But so we started to imagine what Raven is up to now. Like, so Raven didn't just disappear, right? He's around us in some form or another. So in our version of the story, I gave Garth my checklist and objects that I wanted to make. And so he wove a story around this whole idea of Raven and his new adventure. So Raven has fallen asleep, and let's say he fell asleep for 100 years. He wakes up, and then all of a sudden he sees, like, he opens his eyes and like, what are all these buildings? Where did all the trees go? Where are all the clan houses? So he blinks, and then it changes again. So Raven comes out, and his feathers have molted. He's become a white bird again, and he's thinking, I don't like this. Everyone's staring at me, and I can't take it. So he decides he's going to roll himself in the ashes from the fire, and he's going to blacken himself so he can travel around incognito. That's how he likes it. So Raven starts to look around the world, and he starts to see that there are problems, things that he, the people tell him, oh, there's heat wave in the ocean, and all the snow crabs are dying, and he's like, I got to go investigate this. So he goes to the Kushtaka, the land otter people, and he kind of has a meal with them and communes with them, because he knows that the Kushtaka are connected to the shaman spirits. So he says, that's the way I'm going to take the message further and broader. So goes back to walking along the beach, and says, the people say, Raven, you've come back to us. You've come back. It's like, hey, we discovered this box up around the bend on the beach over here. And he says, yeah. I was like, well, let's go check it out. So he's walking along, and they said, last time I found a box, there was the sun, and the sun was in it. It's like, oh, yes, Raven, you're wonderful, and the stars and the moon. He goes, yes, yes. So they finally walk up around the bend on the beach, and they discover this box. And he goes, well, let's check it out. So he opens up the box, and there's nothing in it. And so he says, and they say, well, it says Yeti on this side. And this actually ties into an event that happened where a cargo container fell off a ship, and all these Yeti coolers washed up onto the beaches of Alaska. So we're trying in, a real present-day stories if we can. So he says, well, okay, I'm going to do battle with this Yeti spirit. I'm going to steal its tongue and its power, and I'm going to. So he says, I'll hop in. You close the lid. So he jumps in there, and they're sitting there looking at the box, and nothing's really happening. And finally, the tide comes up and washes the box out into the middle of the ocean. So Raven's done battling this Yeti spirit, and he opens up the lid, and he's in the middle of the ocean. So he creates this hole that he slips down to the bottom of the ocean and walks along the bottom of the ocean, gets back onto land, where he goes to visit Petrel. So Petrel is the keeper of the fresh water. So he's lamenting about the state of the world. He's like, the water's impure. There's, the snow crab are, dealing with heat stroke, and what are we going to do about this? And so Petrel doesn't trust him because Petrel, he stole the water, many, many years ago. And so he's keeping an eye on Raven. He says, you sleep right there. It's gotten dark, so you just sleep and you behave yourself. So Raven goes to Petrel like he did before. He takes dog feces and smears it on his butt and wakes up daybreak, and says, hey old man, you soiled yourself in the middle of the night. So he runs off to clean himself, and he notices this fog hat that the Petrel had used to torment Raven earlier in the many, many years ago. So he's as Petrel flies off, he steals that fog hat, and then he goes to another building, and he says out loud, "What is this building?" And they say, "Well," and this flicker, who observes everything, says, "Well, it's an institution." He goes, "Well, what do they do there?" I said, "Well, nothing for a long time, but they used to take Indian children there, and they would turn them into white men, white men and women." And so he says, but they would do unspeakable things to them. They would torture them, and sometimes the kids would die. And he goes, "Well, I don't see any gravestones." And he says, "Well, that's the way they want it to be. They're there." And so all of these souls come to Raven, and Raven says, "I understand. I feel your presence, and I'm going to avenge you." So he takes that fog hat, and he takes his spirit powers, and he turns it into this haze of sorrow. He puts it in the meadow where the kids are born or are buried, and so people who walk by, they get this feeling of sorrow, and they don't know why. And eventually, they discover the residential school graves. So, anyway, I can finish this one story up before I get. There's a whole nother one. Anyway, so Raven decides he needs to go into a sweat lodge and look for guidance, and he places himself in the sweat lodge for days and days, and then he starts to ascend. He starts to understand the things that are happening in the world, and so he's communicating with these helper spirits, and he's learning things about the troubles in the world, and so he emerges, and he's so now he's ready to do battle, and so he decides to put on his fighting hat. So he decides if he puts a eagle, eagles look a little bit more for boating, so he puts an eagle warrior hat on. So he thinks that people will get back in line quicker, and it worked. So he goes to this frozen river, and he sees all these souls and all these fish that are frozen in the water, and all of that knowledge and all of that information is frozen. So he creates a bonfire on the side of the river, and he flaps his wings, and then the river starts to flow again, and restores order to the world. Of course, Raven's always hungry, and he sees the salmon, and he meets the salmon chief, and he says, "Gosh, I've been doing all this stuff, and now I'm really, really hungry." And of course, Raven's always hungry, so he he says, I'm just, I just want to eat one of these fish, but, they're too clever for me. I can't catch them. So the salmon says, if you ask in a nice way, you can have one of these fish. And so the fish he starts talking to him, little fishies, come to me. And so the fish swim up to him and says, as long as you're respectful, you don't take more than you need, then they'll come back to you and you'll always have salmon. So one of the salmon jumps up onto the river. So he eats the salmon and continues on his journey. And then, so all of these stories actually are much more clever when you read them. So we're going to make this collection of stories, and Garth, as a writer, is an amazing, collaborator with this. And so now the final scene is that he sees these wolves, and he realizes that the wolves are a highly organized society. So he's gearing up for more adventures. And there's a whole other story, but I'm going to stop right there.
Well, do we have any questions? We'd love to have you tell that story too.
Yeah, there's The World According to Raven.
My name is Rene. It was wonderful. I have first an idea, and then I have a question. If you ever collaborate with a Greek artist, maybe you guys could do Medusa and Raven having a chat, because Raven also really liked to turn people to stone. And then my question is, looking at this wonderful work that you've done, I know that you've put some thought into legacy. And I know you were talking about this idea of having potentially a glass-blowing studio and teaching space here on Tlingit, where you could sort of come and visit and also maybe put a teacher there, and then you could come in and be the master artist who comes in and levels people up. Could you maybe share what that vision could look like?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that just kind of popped up. I was working on kind of expanding, what could raise the work, my work, or my efforts into the next level and create a legacy of. I've always wanted to teach other Native kids, Native youth, especially to learn how to work with the material of glass. And so I've kind of blathered on this about this for 10 years with SHI. Okay, you've got this great facility. Where's the glass studio? I don't see it. So, yet on the other hand, I think there's already a model for success. And down in Washington State, there's 2 high school programs that are in existence. They're called Hilltop. And they grab kids from high school and they teach them how to blow glass. And lo and behold, there are some people that learn about the process of working with glass, understand, and know how much work really goes into it. And so I'm thinking that if we could establish a studio here, that it could become somewhat of a cottage industry, where we could train locals, Native youth. I'm thinking in particular. Of course, a lot of people could be open to many people, but I could design objects that could be made easily, and sort of in a training ground in how to blow glass. We could make glass castings. We could make things. It could become like a cottage industry, so to speak, which I believe would be an amazing attraction. I don't want to say tourist attraction, but it could be not just a tourist attraction, although it would be very popular, but it would also teach the community how to work together. That's one thing that is a takeaway. I've traveled so far. I've all with the material of glass. I understand how it works. I could impart that upon a community, I think it could be an amazing thing that would develop. It wouldn't be cheap and it wouldn't happen very fast, but it'd be something that I would like to see happen, because it's done nothing but open doors for me. It's given me a path. It's given me a way to focus and connect, and it's a discipline. And it's hard work. It's not easy. So how do we start that education process? That's what I'm looking for. So it just so happens, and I don't know, I'm speaking completely prematurely, I don't know, but I was speaking to Alyssa London, who is a very savvy businesswoman. She was Miss Alaska a few years ago. She would like to help me explore this opportunity, and I don't know where it would be, what community would like to get behind the idea of building a glass studio in Alaska, somewhere. So I'm just floating the idea, you know. If you want, you can collect checks at the door if you want to support. I'd love to get started sooner than later. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question here from the audience.
Cheese, Preston. So I'm a shameless fan here with your book and also your necklace. But you know, we get thousands of visitors coming through the Clan House here every year, and we love using your work here in the Clan House as an example about how, you know, our art, it's an ancient art. It has very strict rules, you know, about spacing and colors and lines. But at the same time, it's also an art that's allowed to progress through time, that makes connections to youth and in different mediums like glass. So goodness cheese for that. The question I have is there anything in particular or special about the house post, the warrior house post, or the screen that stands out in your mind that we could share with our guests that come through here?
Well, you know, having grown up in Seattle, away from the Tlingit community, you know, when I started to bring my work back here to Celebration, they have the juried art shows and what have you, and so there's the first time people saw my work up here, and elders would look at it and they were like, yeah, we've got this great show, you know, and they're, you know, announcing the award winners. We've got baskets and prints, and we've got carvings, and now we have glass, you know. So, it really, this has been amazing, you know, because it signifies to me that the community is open to new materials, and that's important, because a lot of people who are collectors look at my work and go, well, that's not traditional. It was never done in glass before. And I'd be like, well, now it is. You know, I mean, of course, it's not made for use. It's made to be looked at, and people get afraid of the glass. But when I was asked to make this triptych for the Clan House here, I felt as though I had prepared my whole life to do the best thing that I could do. In the old days, you know, the art was perpetuated by the clan leaders. It was the house leaders would commission the work of the opposite moiety to be made, totem poles and everything carved. And so that commerce, that has changed. I'm forced to go to the commercial market. I'm forced to sell my work through galleries because they're the ones that are paying the money for the pieces, and it perpetuates my practice. So when I had the opportunity to make this, it felt like, you know, I was doing something significant for the community. And so, you know, the screen itself, you know, is made sort of ambiguous. Could be eagle, could be raven. I'm not saying which, because of course, you know, you've got the eagle and the raven, and you know who's getting top billing here. So it's up to your interpretation. The house posts were, upon Rosita's request, she said, she had an idea, for the house post. She said, what about if we made it an eagle and a raven warrior, a warrior figure? Because at the time they wanted to do something to honor the vets, the Alaska Native vets. And so I said, that's a great idea. So we have the eagle warrior, we have the raven warrior, and that was something that was it worked. So for me, like I say, this was, again, an opportunity for me to do, to apply the work that I've done, all of the knowledge that I had to execute these giant pieces. This is the largest screen I've made. These are some of the biggest castings that have been made. There are not many pieces of glass that are that scale. They're like 600 pounds. So in any case, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be, working with Sealaska Heritage to help try to make, educational programming around the cultural arts, around the history, the language, and all of the above. So this is great to be here, and I'm grateful for you all being here today. I'm happy to take more questions if.
Yeah, we'll continue with questions.
This is a native event, we're only 1 hour in, so.
Well, thank you for that last answer. That anticipated a question we had online, so we'll go right to another audience here.
Well, I don't have a question, Preston, but I do want you to know, because I come up like from where you are, spend time over in Glacier Bay, that kind of thing. Coming over here and to be able to hear your story. I've known you for a long time, but I have not known your story. And so I want you to know that I appreciate being able to be here and hear you share with us your journey, because that's been a long time now, like you've been doing that. And it's very commendable, very respectable. And the medium of glass like that, where I'm coming into our societies now, it's all good. It all works together. So I just want you to know that.
Oh,
I'm glad I was here to be able to come here and sit down and listen to you share with us. That's been awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions? You, Joe? No? All righty, well, thank you very much. Awesome talk.
Sounds good.